My name is Margaret Alice Hennessy. Most people in my life now just call me Mom or Grandma Maggie. But Margaret is what's written on the bank statements and the county tax bills that come twice a year. Margaret is who I was before I was anyone else, to anyone else. I am 76 years old. I live alone in a narrow red brick house with white shutters at the edge of town. My life has grown quiet, but it isn't empty. I am not someone's tragic case, waiting to be rescued or filed away. I have, for most of my adult life, been what I call a comfortable woman, the person people come to, lean on, drop off worries with, and assume will simply always be there, like the clock in the hallway or the coat rack by the door. It has been almost 6 years since my husband Frank died. For 47 years we were married. He was kind, restless, a bit vague with money, but always certain about what he wanted for breakfast. I miss him in the smallest ways. Reaching for the marmalade, expecting to find the jar open and a little sticky, or hearing his favorite radio show on Sunday mornings. He's still here, in the shape of the old armchair I never moved, and in the creak on the third stair. Our house is modest but tidy. It is not filled with treasures, but there are a few. Pressed violets in a little frame, a brass bird that belonged to my grandmother, my mother's teapot that whistles too loud, a faded wedding photograph on the mantel. These are the things I keep. Everything else is functional. I like a routine. I rise at 6:30, put on the kettle, and sit in the back garden with a mug of tea, no matter the weather. The roses are coming in beautifully this year, thanks to the long, cold spring. The scent clings to my cardigan when I come in. I have two children. One, my daughter Ellen, who lives 15 minutes away and visits with my grandchildren whenever there's a school holiday or a dentist's appointment she can't reschedule. The other, my son, Peter, moved out to Oregon years ago. He calls sometimes, more in guilt than in love. But I listen all the same and never remind him of anything he's forgotten. I learned long ago that it's kinder not to. Ellen is a capable woman, always in motion, always planning, always balancing something on her phone as she walks through my front door, her children's sneakers squeaking on the kitchen floor. She says, "Hi, Mom, how are you?" But her eyes are already scanning the room for things to fix or improve. I have learned not to take this personally. People want to help, even when help is not needed. My grandchildren, Ben and Molly, love to rummage through my drawers and eat my homemade lemon bars. I let them. I was never an indulgent mother, but I find myself a more forgiving grandmother. Ben tells me about science projects and girls he likes. Molly shows me her dance routines, gangly and earnest in my narrow living room. The best times are the afternoons when they nap on my old sofa, and I have a few quiet minutes to watch them breathe, safe and soft-cheeked. I still do most things for myself. I walk to the corner store every Thursday for milk and bread. I keep my own checkbook. I drive my car, slowly but with purpose, down to the post office and the library. I know the librarians by name, and they know mine, and they set aside the new mysteries for me before anyone else gets a chance. It is a small privilege, but I take pleasure in it. I am not lonely. I have neighbors I nod to, a garden club that meets every other month, and a book circle that talks more about television than books. I am not busy, but I am not bored. There is always something to be done: deadheading the roses, baking a loaf of bread, writing a letter to an old friend, sorting photographs, or just sitting in the afternoon sun with the newspaper folded in my lap. Of course, there are aches and slights. My right knee is stiff in the mornings. My hands fumble with the medicine bottle. I sometimes forget why I walked into a room. I miss the days when every hour was full, when I was needed. But I have come to like this quiet season. I enjoy not having to explain myself, not having to check in or check out. My days belong to me. Sometimes, though, I wonder if the world is shrinking around me. It happens slowly. First, people stop asking for your opinion. Then they stop asking for your presence. You become mom at holidays, grandma at recitals, Margaret to the mail carrier and the pharmacist. You are here, but in the background, like wallpaper or the hum of the refrigerator. Not invisible, not gone, just unremarkable. Still, I have made my peace with it. There are advantages. No one expects much. You can take your time, sit as long as you want over your tea, leave a puzzle half finished on the table for a week, and no one will complain. You can listen, really listen, to other people, and they will tell you things they never tell anyone else because you are safe and soft, and what you think doesn't matter. Sometimes that feels like a superpower. It is early summer now. The air is sweet with cut grass. I spend most evenings on my back porch with a book and the sound of the radio drifting out from the kitchen. The roses are in bloom, deep velvet red, and the neighbors' children run up and down the street until dusk, their laughter carrying through the open windows. There is nothing urgent left for me to do. I have learned to enjoy that too. I don't know what comes next, and I don't much worry about it. I have always managed. I have always found my place, even if that place is sometimes the seat at the far end of the table, next to the coats, where no one notices you leaving. That's all right. I am here. I am Margaret, and this is my house, my life, my day, for as long as I care to call it mine. The last week of June arrived in a slow, heavy heat, settling over the house and garden like a second invisible quilt. I woke to the hum of bees in the roses and a faint ache in my hip, but the day itself felt full of possibility, until the knock came at 10:30, sharp and practiced, like everything Ellen did. She let herself in with her key, as she always did, her voice following her before she was even in the hallway. "Mom?" She smelled faintly of lavender hand sanitizer and coffee. I could hear her flipping through the day, mentally checking off a dozen errands. In her hands, she carried a tote bag, a canvas one with a bluebird stitched on the front, a gift I'd made her for her 30th birthday and rarely saw in use. "Kitchen," I called, closing the garden door behind me and wiping my hands on my apron. She appeared in the doorway smiling, her hair pulled back tight. "You've been outside already," she said, taking in my muddy knees and the empty teacup by the sink. "It's the best time for deadheading," I replied, knowing she'd have no interest in the difference between a faded rose and one just past its prime. Ben and Molly were not with her. I felt their absence as I looked at the clock. It was a weekday after all, but still it registered. She put the tote on the table and glanced around the kitchen, her eyes lingering on the full fruit bowl, the stack of library books, the grocery list by the phone. "You're up early," she said, and then a pause. "How are you sleeping?" "Well enough." I poured her a cup of tea, just as I always did, and slid the sugar bowl toward her. The kitchen was full of morning light, the kind that made the yellow linoleum glow like honey. She hesitated. "Mom," she said, "can we sit a minute? There's something I'd like to talk about." Her tone was soft, rehearsed. I felt a knot tighten in my chest, the way it used to when the school called and said, "Is this Mrs. Hennessy?" But I only nodded, pulling out the chair opposite hers. She reached into the tote and pulled out a tidy folder, clipped shut with a sky blue fastener. Out slipped several glossy brochures. "The Lake House, Country Living for Seniors." "The TV Room, Your New Favorite Place." "3 balanced meals a day, 7 days a week." I studied the covers, the soft focus images of well-dressed retirees in sun hats, chessboards, a golden retriever under a garden table, a woman painting at an easel, while a nurse looked on with manufactured warmth. Ellen cleared her throat. "Mom, this isn't. I just want you to look at these. That's all. I brought them so you could read, not. She glanced at me, uncertain, then hurried on. It's not because you're in the way or anything like that. It's just, sometimes I worry you get tired by yourself. Things aren't as easy anymore. The garden, the car, the stairs. And I know you say you're fine, but, well, these places are nice, really nice. Everything is close by, and the staff is supposed to be wonderful. You'd have your own room. There's a lake, activities, even a little library. She pushed the brochures across the table, but didn't touch my hand. I kept my face calm, polite. I had practiced this expression over the years, when the children were small and needed reassurance, when Frank came home with bad news from work, when I was told, gently, that a friend had died. I nodded as if she'd told me the weather forecast. That's thoughtful of you, Ellen. Thank you for bringing these. She seemed relieved at my lack of protest. I can show you the websites later if you want. They have tours, virtual even. And we could come visit all the time. Ben and Molly could. Well, there are kids' days. It's not, Mom, it's not that I want to move you. I just don't want you to be stuck here, all by yourself. I picked up one of the brochures, letting the gloss catch the light. Let me think about it for a couple of days, I said, voice level. No need to rush anything. Of course, Mom, no rush at all. But I could hear the hope in her voice, like a door opening in another room. We talked about other things, or pretended to, the upcoming school play, Ben's braces, whether or not Molly should switch to ballet. I nodded at the right places, filled the silence with questions. But underneath, a current had shifted. Something was moving, and not just the light on the table. When Ellen left, she hugged me a little tighter than usual, her hands lingering at my back. Love you, Mom. Call me if you need anything, okay? Anything at all. I stood at the window and watched her drive away, the tote bag propped beside her on the passenger seat, now empty of its offering. I did not cry. I did not even feel angry or surprised. I knew this was not cruelty. It was the gentle, reasonable, suffocating love of someone who believes in solutions. And I had, after all, raised her to be practical, to prepare, to plan. I sat at the kitchen table as the morning faded, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old pipes, the distant shouts of neighborhood children. I took the brochures and placed them neatly in the drawer beside my recipe cards, next to the instructions for how to operate the old blender and a coupon for dry cleaning I would never use again. That night, after the house had grown quiet and the sky outside the window turned from blue to soft charcoal, I took the folder out again. I turned the pages slowly, reading the promises: safety, security, community, comfort, each word both invitation and warning. I did not sleep much that night. I went out onto the back porch, the roses shadowy and blue in the moonlight. I made a list in my mind of what I would miss and what I would not. I thought about the first time I brought Ellen home from the hospital, so small, wrapped in a yellow blanket, and how terrified I was of doing something wrong. I thought about all the years I had spent making things easier for everyone else, smoothing over, tidying up, saying yes, saying I'm fine, even when I wasn't. At 2 in the morning, I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam rise in the darkness. I did not open the brochures again, but I did take out a pad of paper and write, in careful, deliberate letters, things to do. I wrote down 7 items and underlined the first one twice. I did not know if I was making a decision or if the decision had already been made for me in the slow drift of years and habits, but I knew suddenly that I would not wait for someone else to move me. Whatever happened next, I would do the moving. I've always believed there's a particular dignity in being prepared, Not in the nervous way of hoarding for emergencies, but in the steady, silent readiness that comes from a life of picking up after others and of being the one to make sure everything is set in its place. That's what I did as a wife, as a mother, as the person who never needed reminding. The next morning, after a night of shallow sleep, I woke with my plan already growing inside me, quiet, like a secret garden blooming behind a locked gate. First, I made breakfast: oatmeal, apples stewed with cinnamon, tea strong enough to wake me. The rituals kept my hands from trembling. Then I set about my ordinary chores with a new precision: laundry sorted and folded, beds made, the garden watered, each thing done as if I might be judged for leaving it out of order. By mid-morning, the kitchen sparkled, the house smelled of lavender polish, and I sat at the table, list in hand, a pen rolling between my fingers. Power of attorney. Frank had taught me to handle our affairs. Still, over the years, I'd let Ellen take over bits and pieces: online accounts, doctor's appointments, even renewing my driver's license last year. I was not helpless, but I had become accustomed to asking, and she had become accustomed to answering. It was time to draw those boundaries again. I called our family lawyer, Mr. Tobin, whose number was pressed between the recipe for lemon squares and an old reminder about the chimney sweep. His secretary, who remembered me from Frank's will, booked me an appointment for Thursday morning. I did not tell Ellen. I did not tell anyone. Money. Next, I drove to the bank, slowly taking in the early summer sun, the familiar crackle of gravel in the parking lot. I had always kept a rainy day fund. Frank and I believed in independence. Over the years, I'd added to it quietly. The manager, a young man who wore too much cologne, greeted me with practiced cheerfulness. I smiled politely and withdrew what I needed, requesting cashier's checks for the larger sum, small bills for the rest. I asked about closing the joint account Ellen helped manage. The young man's smile faltered for a moment, but he did not protest. He handed me forms, printed in triplicate. I signed without shaking. Documents. At home, I gathered everything: birth certificates, marriage license, the deed to the house, insurance policies. They went into a file box, the blue one with the metal latch I'd kept under my bed for years. I shredded what was no longer relevant, working in silence, the whir of the machine a small thrill of finality. The car. The Corolla was 10 years old, but it ran well enough. I placed an ad online, then called Mr. Hahn, my mechanic, who knew everyone in town. He promised to ask around. "You leaving us, Mrs. Hennessy?" he joked. I laughed, light and airy, and said I was just thinking ahead. The house. This, more than anything, felt like cutting a route. I walked from room to room, touching the familiar things: the tapestry above the mantel, the chipped teacups, the little silver bells Frank had bought in Prague. I'd never thought of myself as sentimental, but now each object held a memory I had to decide whether to keep or release. I called an estate agent, Jane Lockwood, who sold the Petersons their house across the street. She remembered my roses, my lemon bars at the last open house. We met the next morning, and she walked through the house with the slow, respectful steps of someone visiting a museum. "It's a lovely place, Margaret," she said. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's time." She did not press, did not pry. She simply made notes, took photographs, and told me the first viewing could be as soon as I wanted. I asked for 2 weeks. "Just so I can set things right," I said. "A place of my own." No one knew about the maps tucked away in my desk drawer, the ones I'd collected from tourist brochures and library magazines over the past 3 months. I'd been circling towns in the South, places where the winters were gentler and the air smelled of citrus instead of wet leaves and chimney smoke. One place, Marston's Cove, kept coming back to me. A quiet, unremarkable town with a cluster of whitewashed cottages, a second-hand bookshop, a tiny pier with sailboats, and a library that hosted author talks every other Thursday. I'd found a photograph online of a small house with a wide veranda and an orange tree growing just outside the bedroom window. It was nothing like the homes around here. That was the point. I wrote an inquiry email, careful and formal. I am a retired widow looking for a long-term rental or modest purchase in a quiet neighborhood. Must have a garden, no stairs. The answer came in 2 days. The house was available, furnished, ready as soon as I wished. The owner, a school teacher headed overseas for 2 years, was delighted to rent to someone who valued quiet. Goodbyes, unspoken. I watched Ellen come and go, always in a hurry, sometimes with Molly in tow. She brought me groceries, straightened the cushions, left notes about the garden hose. Once or twice she asked, "Have you thought about the brochures, Mom?" I told her, truthfully, "I'm thinking." She seemed satisfied, or at least relieved that I wasn't arguing. I saw her as she was, not a villain, not unkind, just a daughter trying to do her best with what she understood of the world. I could not blame her for wanting ease and order. I had taught her both. I started sorting my belongings, boxes of books, the old record player, my wedding dress in yellowed tissue. I packed what I wanted, labeled the rest for donation or for Ellen and Peter to divide as they wished. The house grew emptier, but not colder. It felt lighter, as if preparing for flight. Each day, I wrote out my list and checked things off. Lawyer appointment, bank paperwork, estate agent's visit, car sold, utilities canceled, mail forwarded to a P.O. box in Marston's Cove, phone service scheduled for disconnection. At night, when the day's tasks were done, I sat on the porch, a mug of tea warming my hands. I looked at the roses, already fading in the July heat, and thought about how a plant knows when to let go of a bloom, how it prepares itself quietly for the next season. I did not feel afraid. In fact, I felt something blooming inside me, a kind of fierce, careful joy, the joy of taking back my life in small, deliberate steps. I did not tell anyone about my plans, not Ellen, not Peter, not my neighbors, not the friends from the library. I wanted no resistance, no explanations, no teary goodbyes or attempts to dissuade me. My departure would be as gentle and unremarkable as a tide slipping out at dawn. As the final week in the house approached, I set one last kettle of water to boil, took my list to the garden, and watched the steam drift up into the blue morning sky. I was not leaving out of bitterness. I was not running away. I was walking for the first time in decades towards something that belonged only to me. I had always thought goodbyes would be more dramatic. Voices raised, arms flung around necks, the slam of a door echoing down an empty hallway. But it turned out, when you have spent your life being gentle, the exit can be just as soft. The last week in my old house passed in layers, peeling away routines, habits, possessions, each day another small unfastening from the life I'd spent decades building. I moved through the rooms as if I were visiting a childhood home, with reverence, nostalgia, and the knowledge that what mattered most was already part of me, impossible to pack or give away. On Monday, I woke early, the sunlight a pale wash over the bedroom wallpaper. I let myself linger in bed, feeling the dip where Frank used to sleep, tracing the pattern of tiny violets with my fingertips. The house was still and expectant, the way it sometimes was before a thunderstorm. I made tea, buttered a slice of toast, and sat by the kitchen window to watch the world go by. A mail carrier walking his slow route, the neighbor's cat sunning itself on my garden wall. The packing was mostly done by then. I had pared my things down to the essentials: clothes, books, 2 battered suitcases, the jewelry box Frank gave me on our 20th anniversary. The rest, so many little treasures and unnecessary objects, were boxed and labeled for the estate sale. I had decided to leave the furniture, the big things, for the agent. My new place would have what I needed. What I wanted, I would choose myself. I set aside an afternoon to write out instructions for Ellen and Peter. Lists of items left for them, the key to the garden shed, passwords for old accounts, the folder with their childhood photographs. I made a point to write in a steady, unhurried hand so there would be no confusion, no sense of haste or panic. I arranged for the utility companies to end service a few days after my departure. I visited the post office, leaving the forwarding address for my mail, just a box number, in a town neither of my children had ever visited. It felt like claiming a piece of privacy, a room of my own, somewhere deep in the world. Throughout the week, Ellen came by twice. She brought fresh peaches and a bag of groceries, fussed over the boxes, asked if I needed help sorting or carrying things down to the car. I thanked her and let her believe I was preparing for a future she understood, a future where I would wait, quietly, to be moved like an heirloom. She never saw the moving van in the driveway, the one I had hired under my own name, scheduled for early Saturday morning. At night, I took walks around the neighborhood, passing the familiar houses, some unchanged for decades, others gutted and made new by young families. I watched the children riding bicycles, the porch lights flickering on as dusk gathered, the scent of barbecues drifting through the air. It was all so familiar, but I already felt a kind of distance, as if I were seeing it all for the last time, through glass. The house echoed more with each passing day. In the bathroom, only the things I would take lined the shelf: my toothbrush, a half-used bottle of rose water, a comb. In the kitchen, the cupboards were nearly bare, save for a jar of marmalade, a box of tea, a tin of biscuits for the road. My suitcase stood by the door like a polite guest, waiting for its cue. On Friday evening, I stood in the garden as the sun set, the sky painted in layers of pink and gold. The roses were nearly spent, their petals dropping to the ground in soft spirals. I knelt in the dirt, digging with my hands to loosen the roots of one favorite bush, a cutting from my mother's garden, given to me the summer Frank proposed. I wrapped the roots in damp newspaper, a small promise of continuity. It would come with me. That night, the house was so quiet it almost felt empty of air. I did not sleep, not really, just drifted in and out, listening to the familiar creaks, memorizing the rhythm of the place that had held me for so long. At dawn, I made my final round, unplugged the lamps, swept the kitchen floor, watered the rose cutting. I took one last mug of tea on the back porch, breathing the cool morning and saying goodbye to the birds, the sound of distant traffic, the lives I had watched unfold from these steps. At 7, the moving van arrived. The driver was a gentle, silver-haired man who did not ask questions. He loaded my suitcases, the rose cutting, 2 boxes marked books, and my favorite chair, the one Frank always used, without a word. I left my cell phone charging by the bed. The number would be disconnected by the afternoon. I tucked the house keys and a letter for Ellen into the mailbox, knowing she would find it when she next came by. The letter was brief, not an explanation, but a thank you. I am safe and I am happy. You need not worry. I closed the door behind me, standing for a moment in the cool shade of the entryway. My heart did not race, nor did my hands tremble. I felt almost weightless, as if the air itself was lifting me toward what came next. I walked down the path to the street, the early sun glinting on the dewy grass. The roses brushed against my skirt as I passed, leaving a faint scent behind. I did not look back. I had always been taught that the past is not something to drag with you, but something to honor and then let go. The drive south was long and quiet. I watched the countryside change, the hills smoothing out, the trees growing taller and greener, the air thickening with the promise of the sea. I stopped once for gas, stretching my legs and buying a newspaper, enjoying the anonymity of being just another old woman passing through. By midday, I was close. The town appeared slowly, not with fanfare, but with small, gentle clues: hand-painted signs for fruit stands, a white steeple, children on bicycles, the scent of salt in the air. I found my new house, a small white cottage set back from the street with a wide porch and an orange tree blooming by the window, exactly as I had imagined. The owner had left a note on the kitchen table. "Welcome, Margaret. The keys are by the door. The kettle is on the stove." The house smelled of lavender and soap, and the floor shone in the afternoon light. I unpacked quietly, placing my books on the shelves, arranging my clothes in the wardrobe, setting the rose cutting in a patch of sun near the porch steps. I sat for a long time on the veranda, watching the light move through the leaves of the orange tree, listening to the sound of distant gulls and the low hum of a world that did not know me. It was not loneliness I felt, nor regret. It was relief, a slow, expansive release, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. There was no one to report to, no one to coordinate with, no one to reassure or explain myself to. I was not a piece of furniture to be transported. I was a person who could walk, who could choose, who could leave. And so I did. The first morning in Marston's Cove, I woke to the sound of birds I couldn't name. Their songs came through the open window, mingling with the faint scent of orange blossoms and the briny air drifting in from the unseen ocean. For a few disoriented seconds, I forgot where I was. The ceiling was too smooth, the curtains too bright, and the familiar creak of my old house was missing. I half expected to hear Frank humming in the kitchen or Ellen's voice on the stairs. Instead, there was only the hush of a quiet street and the slow, unhurried rhythm of a town waking up. I lay still, letting the unfamiliar comfort of the new bed settle around me. The mattress was firmer than mine at home, the pillow not yet shaped by years of sleep, but the sunlight was honest and golden, and I felt no pull to rush. No one needed me, no schedule waited for my approval. The day, for the first time in decades, was entirely my own. I made tea slowly, reading the handwritten instructions the owner had left for the temperamental stove. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the world outside: a boy walking his dog, a delivery van chugging past, an old woman sweeping her porch. None of them glanced my way. I was nobody here, not Mom, not Grandma, not Mrs. Hennessy, just Margaret, an older woman in a borrowed house with the day spread open before her. There were boxes to unpack, of course. I did it methodically, pausing over every object as if I were rediscovering it for the first time. My favorite mug, chipped but perfectly balanced, a well-worn copy of Persuasion, my mother's recipe book, its spine held together with duct tape and hope. I put the rose cutting on the porch, praying the new soil and salt air would not be too harsh for its roots. The small kitchen filled quickly with the familiar, the strange, and the scent of oranges. By late morning, I felt bold enough to venture outside. Marston's Cove revealed itself in layers. First, the narrow, drowsy street where my house stood. Then the next block where a bakery sent up clouds of cinnamon sugar into the breeze. I wandered past neat rows of bungalows, each painted in pastel colors, their gardens crowded with sunflowers and wild thyme. I passed a trio of girls playing hopscotch, their laughter echoing down the street. No one stopped me or asked me who I was. I felt almost weightless. At the corner, a small wooden sign, Marston Public Library, pointed down a side street. The library was a modest building, its windows brimming with sunlight, a pot of geraniums by the door. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of paper and polish. A woman about my age sat at the desk, peering over her glasses at a stack of returned books. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm and kind. "I'd like a library card, please. I'm new in town," I said, hearing the unfamiliar pride in my own words. She smiled. "Name?" "Margaret. Just Margaret." The card was handed over with no more fuss than that. She pointed out the notice board where local events were posted: an author talk next Thursday, a history lecture on the harbor's founding, a knitting group that met every Monday. I took a leaflet for the lecture and signed up for the knitting group, unsure if I would go, but wanting the possibility. On my way back, I stopped at the bakery, buying a single cinnamon bun and a small loaf of bread. The young woman behind the counter asked, "Would you like anything else, love?" I shook my head, not used to the gentle intimacy of strangers. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with my bun and a book, watching the slow drift of clouds and the glint of light on the neighbors' wind chimes. Children biked by, calling to each other. Someone practiced scales on a piano with the windows wide open. No one knew my name, my history, or my habits. I was free to invent myself again, if only in small ways. In the days that followed, I allowed myself to experiment. I rearranged the furniture in the living room so the armchair faced the window, not the television. I took long walks on the beach, collecting shells and letting the cold waves shock my feet awake. I signed up for the author talk and went, sitting quietly in the second row, smiling at a joke no one expected her to laugh at. I learned to cook for one: roast vegetables, fresh fish, omelets heavy with herbs from my tiny garden. The woman from the library, her name was Hazel, invited me for tea after the knitting group. We sat in her tidy kitchen, talking about books, about weather, about the odd quirks of small towns. She did not ask about my family, and I did not offer. There was relief in that, in being treated as a woman with a present and a future, not just a tangle of stories from the past. Some evenings, I walked to the pier and watched the boats sway in the harbor, their masts creaking, their sails flapping loose. The sea air was cool and salted my lips. Sometimes I sat with other people, mostly older women, who brought flasks of tea and stories about their gardens. Sometimes I simply sat alone, watching the sun slide behind the water, feeling no urge to fill the silence. I got to know the routines of the town, the way the bakery sold out of scones by 10, the sound of the noon bell from the church tower, the way shopkeepers swept their stoops every morning. I learned which street led to the park with the old willow trees and which led to the corner store where the owner called me ma'am and never asked my business. In the library, I grew bold enough to check out poetry, something Frank always teased me for. I started writing small notes to myself, phrases I wanted to remember, memories I wanted to keep. I tried painting, buying a little set of watercolors from the art shop, laughing at my shaky lines and unsteady colors. Each night, I fell asleep to the sound of the orange tree tapping against the window, the distant call of an owl, and the comfort of knowing no one expected anything of me in the morning. My days became my own, a gentle unfolding, a rediscovery of solitude, not as a lack, but as a kind of richness. Once, at the market, someone called out to me, just "Margaret," and I turned, surprised at how quickly I had become part of the place, not as someone's mother or widow, but as myself. It was such a small thing, and yet I carried it with me all day, as bright as the sun on the sea. I wrote postcards to old friends, to Peter and Ellen, to my grandchildren, each one carefully worded, giving news but not details, sending love but not explanation. It was not secrecy, but privacy, an invisible line, newly drawn, between what I shared and what I kept for myself. Sometimes, as I sat on the veranda at dusk, a cup of tea warm in my hands and the air heavy with the scent of oranges, I thought of my old life, the steady hum of obligations, the soft weight of being always available. I felt no regret, only a gentle, thankful grief for what was finished and a quiet gladness for what was beginning. I was not comfortable in the old way. I was not the background of someone else's story. Here, I was simply Margaret, a woman with a small house, a rose bush with new roots, and a door that opened to the world on her own terms. A month passed in Marston's Cove with the slow, sure gentleness of good weather. Each day knitted itself to the next. The porch swing creaked its lullaby, the orange tree lost and gained blossoms. The distant gulls called above the beach, and the house, little by little, came to feel less like a rental and more like home. I made friends with the postmistress, a tidy woman with sharp eyes and a fondness for dogs. Her name was Louise, and she worked in the small white post office 2 blocks from my cottage. I visited every week, first to pick up forwarded mail, then to send the occasional postcard, and eventually just for the ritual of being recognized. We spoke of books, recipes, and, one afternoon, the history of the crooked lamppost outside her window. She never asked why I had come to Marston's Cove. In return, I never asked about the faded photograph of a man she kept propped beside her stamps. I had not written much to Ellen, or to Peter, or even to my grandchildren. I received a single letter from Ellen in the first weeks, written with the careful, hesitant tone of someone unsure if she was trespassing. Dear Mom, I hope you're safe and well. I wish you'd left more of a plan or a number we could reach. Ben and Molly ask about you every day. If you get this, please call us. I promise I'm not upset, just worried. Her words landed somewhere between the lines of love and the sharpness of loss. I could feel the ache, the confusion, the desire for things to be fixed and explained. I did not reply right away. Instead, I walked the beach for days, the letter folded in my pocket, smoothing its edges with my thumb as I watched the tide. Sometimes I would sit by the water, watching shells tumble in the foam, thinking of all the years I had responded, instantly, automatically, always smoothing things over. I realized I no longer wanted to live by reflex. The truth was, I was not angry with Ellen, nor did I wish to punish her. I saw her heart even in her mistakes. I saw the little girl inside the woman, the one who wanted reassurance. But I also knew with a new certainty that this quiet, this distance, was not a wall, but a necessary space. I had left so I could finally choose what kind of care I wanted, instead of accepting what was handed to me. On a warm afternoon, sunlight glancing off the kitchen tiles, I sat at the small table with a new set of note cards I'd bought at the market. They were printed with a watercolor of an empty beach. A pale sky, a single seashell in the sand, no footprints. I liked the simplicity. I took my time, choosing my words carefully, pausing after every sentence to listen to the hush of the house around me. Dear Ellen, thank you for your care. I am safe and well, truly well, in a way I haven't been for many years. I have chosen a different kind of care, one where I am the one deciding where my door is and when it's open. I think sometimes we love by accident, giving what we would want for ourselves instead of asking what is needed. Please tell Ben and Molly I love them dearly and think of them every day. I will write again soon. Love, Mom. I read the card 3 times, tracing the shape of the words. I did not add a return address, only a postmark from Marston's Cove. I wanted Ellen to know I was out there, living, but not to search or follow. This was a boundary, not a punishment, but a map for the future, one in which I had a say. I walked the 2 blocks to the post office, holding the card like a fragile seed. Louise took it with a smile, adding a shell-shaped sticker as if she understood everything unspoken in my silence. The days that followed felt lighter. With the card sent, I allowed myself to embrace the fullness of my new life. I took on more in town, a morning class at the community center on local history, an invitation from Hazel to help with a book sale, even a potluck dinner at a neighbor's home, where I brought a lemon loaf and was complimented on its old-fashioned flavor. Sometimes, as dusk gathered and the air grew cool, I sat on the porch, watching the town slow into evening. Children's laughter faded, porch lights flicked on one by one, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing in particular. I felt the contentment that comes not from being surrounded, but from belonging to yourself. Weeks later, a second letter arrived. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Ellen's. Mom, I got your card. I'm glad you're safe. I won't try to find you, but I hope you'll write now and then, just so I know you're all right. Ben misses you. He keeps asking if you'll ever visit his soccer game. Molly is learning to bake. She says you taught her that patience is the secret ingredient. I miss you too. Love, Ellen. I smiled, letting the letter rest on my lap. The ache was there, but it was softer, woven through with respect. A new understanding. I took out another note card, this one with a painting of a single rose, and began to write, not as a mother reassuring a child, but as a woman speaking across a chosen distance, holding herself steady. I knew they still didn't know where I was. I knew, too, that I wasn't lost. I was here, in a town where no one knew my past, in a house filled with sunlight and the faint perfume of oranges, and in a life I was finally, quietly, allowed to claim as my own. The summer deepened around me, spilling its light over the orange tree, gilding the edges of my days in Marston's Cove. The routines of the town became as familiar as my own breath. The bakery girl would wave to me each morning, flower on her cheek, and Hazel at the library would save the latest novels for me on a shelf marked Margaret. I became a fixture, a quiet, steady presence at knitting group, a regular on the bench at the park, a participant in potlucks and lectures, a name on the sign-up sheet for a beach cleanup. Yet there was no sense of obligation, no invisible leash of expectation that used to tug at my days. I chose which invitations to accept, which mornings I wanted company, which evenings I would spend alone on the porch with a book and a cup of tea. It was a pattern I wove myself, thread by thread, not for anyone else's comfort, but for my own. The quiet was never emptiness, only space. Space for my thoughts to wander, for my hands to try new things. I learned the tide schedule and the names of seabirds. I joined a watercolor class and painted clumsy seascapes that I taped to the refrigerator, not caring if they were good. I wrote letters to Ellen, to Peter, to my grandchildren. Sometimes stories, sometimes recipes, sometimes simply lists of things I'd noticed. The scent of lemon thyme, the way rain sounded on the roof, the peculiar habits of the man who ran the fruit stand. I sent postcards to old friends, letting them know I was well, asking nothing, needing nothing in return. On Sundays, I strolled to the market for fresh peaches or eggs. Once I saw Louise, the postmistress, arm in arm with a woman from the bakery, laughing in a way that made me feel quietly welcomed into the world's gentle secrets. Sometimes I would walk the beach at dusk, letting the wind whip through my hair, the horizon glowing gold and lavender, thinking of nothing in particular. The town never asked who I had been. No one called me Grandma. No one measured my days by another's needs. There were times, in the first weeks, when I missed the noise, the constant awareness of being needed, the rhythm of other people's schedules. I missed, in a way, the small emergencies, the missing lunchbox, the dropped-off prescription, the last-minute babysitting. But the ache softened as the days wore on, replaced by a new sort of certainty, a knowledge that my own life, however quiet, had weight. Sometimes I would recall moments from before. Frank reading on the porch, Ellen at age 8 with skinned knees, Peter's graduation day, the swirl of children and laughter in my kitchen. I remembered the feeling of always being ready, always smoothing and anticipating, always the safe place to land. I understood now how I had become comfortable, how, in loving others well, I had let my own sharpness blur, had let my identity narrow to the edges of other people's stories. Here, in this town, in this house, I did not disappear. Instead, I found something steady and rich beneath the surface, something that was mine alone. The garden grew beneath my hands. The rose cutting from my mother's bush sent out hesitant new leaves. I spent an afternoon planting bulbs along the fence, kneeling in the sun, feeling the surety of my own body, my own effort, in the dirt. Occasionally, Ellen's letters arrived, less anxious now, more accepting. She wrote about the children, about her own life, about the changes she felt since I had gone. I understand, Mom, truly. Sometimes I wish I were as brave as you, starting over. Peter sent postcards from Oregon, brief but fond, always signing, Love you, Ma. I responded in my own time, never rushed, always honest. My family, I realized, had begun to accept the boundaries I'd drawn. I saw in their words a shift, less of the "Are you okay?" and more of the "What have you discovered?" They had begun to see me as someone with her own story, someone who could, by example, teach the value of self-keeping. There was no great confrontation, no demand for forgiveness or explanation. The distance had done its quiet work. The ache of separation became a new kind of connection, one built on respect, not expectation. I did not blame them for wanting to keep me busy, for wanting to tuck me into the folds of their plans. They had learned it from me, after all. But I was finished with that chapter. I did not leave in anger, nor did I stay out of stubbornness. I simply moved gently and firmly toward the space I needed, and in that space I flourished. My days belonged to me. I woke when I pleased, ate what I liked, walked where I wished. I filled my house with sunlight, fresh bread, the scent of oranges and new books. I let my mind wander, unhurried, into memories and dreams for the future. Sometimes, when I walked through town and someone greeted me by name, just Margaret, I felt the deep gladness of being seen, but not used, not defined by anyone else's need or memory. I understood, finally, the difference between loneliness and solitude. I understood that taking care of myself was not abandonment or neglect, but a necessary act of love, a lesson I wished I had learned sooner, but was grateful to learn at all. The world had wanted to keep me busy. Instead, I took care of myself, without blaming anyone, without asking permission, and for the first time, without fitting my life inside anyone else's plans. I was Margaret, still and always Margaret, and in the cool of the evening, as the sun set over the little town and the orange blossoms closed for the night, I sat on my porch, a book in my lap, and the soft, solid peace of my own company all around me, no longer waiting for someone to move me, but choosing every day where my door would open.